Silence! Unless the witness can produce any genuine name of consequence, this session is now concluded. Sorry, been a while. Welcome back to the Real Life Podcast. I know it's been a fair few weeks. I do apologise, but uni has started again, and so I've been very busy with work. I've been desperately wanting to do this, but in order to do these episodes properly, I like to take time to be able to plan things out and work out what I'm going to say, etc. So I've had to find space to do that. But here I am today. I'm having taken a break from learning about the World Trade Organization and decolonial international theory to do this, and this comes off the back of a recent cinema trip that I made with my flatmates. I took my time, but I finally went round to seeing Elvis. And to be quite honest, I was blown away by it. I'll talk more about that later this episode, but it got me thinking about the other recent biopics, because they seem to be becoming more and more regular in cinema. So we've got Blonde coming out now. I suppose Oppenheimer is going to be a biopic of sorts, but there appears to be a sort of triad of the musical biopics of recent, which is Rocketman, Bohemian Rhapsody, and Elvis. And so today I thought, in the interest of coming off the back of seeing Elvis and being blown away by it, I'm going to rank them and discuss the merits and issues of each of them, and why actually one of them isn't really that good. They can be tricky things, biopics, because you will get aficionados ready to slate every element of the story, even if it's slightly out of kilter. Plus, you have to make it respectful and true to its individual subject, so there's a certain layer of difficulty there. I've made you wait long enough for the next podcast. Let's just dive right in and start off with what is, in my view, the worst of the three, Bohemian Rhapsody. So it's directed by Bryan Singer, who did all of the X-Men movies, but never really made anything that lands quite as outstanding. It's written by Anthony McCartan and Peter Morgan helping on the story. This is definitely, and I think by a comfortable distance, the worst of the three, despite, so far, we'll get to see what happens with Elvis, being the leading film in terms of the amount of Oscars it won. Let's talk about the Oscar performance, because Rami Malek is absolutely sensational. He's incredible, and he deservedly walked away with the Oscar. I thought it was the perfect reincarnation of Freddie Mercury. He deserves astounding credit for the dedication and the work in achieving almost a flawless version or reinterpretation of such a beloved figure. The idea of him keeping the teeth in all the time, helping him out, I think, those elements of method acting are the kind of things that actually do help, not just being an arse all the time because your character's an arse. That doesn't really help. But those physical things to help him get used to the kind of style and the movement of Freddie's mouth and his singing style. I think there are some great bits in the film. The extended sequence of the Old Wembley concert, if you haven't seen it, is masterful, from the camera work to the performance to the production design to the look of the whole thing. And the concert and actual music scenes of the film, I would say, are the standout elements. They nail them, but perhaps capturing the best performance aspect of any of the three films, possibly, that I'm talking about today. It was decently enjoyable, and there is stuff that is good in it. I don't want you to think that this is going to be a review where I slate the film, because it doesn't quite deserve that. However, there are several issues, and you can tell before even watching the film, if you look at the production process, that it was kind of doomed to fail. For a start, Bryan Singer shouldn't really be working, in my opinion. He's had several allegations against him and a financial resolve to one case, which is a worrying sight regardless, and quite apart from anything else, he was the wrong choice creatively to direct the film, I think. It doesn't help that he left it. They kept having clashes. Every element of the production, from producers to directors to actual actors themselves, kept disagreeing on loads of different elements of the film, and that's not a good environment to create something worthwhile. You may know that Sacha Baron Cohen had been previously hired to play Freddie Mercury, and I think he'd been excited about it, but I think he was kind of left with no choice but to pull out after what they call creative differences arose with the producers and the director, namely Graham King on production, by the way, who is a very distinguished producer. He's produced films like The Aviator and Departed, and then Ben Whishaw was also drafted in, but was like, yeah, nah, mate, you can, get your shit together and I might be on board, but till then, this isn't really my thing. This doesn't look good to me. And you could kind of tell from where it was going. Thankfully, they managed to hire Dexter Fletcher to take over for the completion of the project, and you can tell that there's been two directors here. It's shot in sort of fairly standard but zingy Bryan Singer way, but the Fletcher style clashes with that because it's so much warmer and more colourful and vibrant. And remember Fletcher's name, by the way, because we will hear from him later on. It's a mercy that they did bring in Fletcher, because up until then, everything Singer had done had been really a bit of a mess. By the way, does anyone else kind of want to see Sacha Baron Cohen giving his Freddie Mercury? Because I would, but I'm slightly glad it didn't end up being him, because every way to Sunday, you put that mustache on Sacha Baron Cohen, and suddenly it's very nice. We all know it. Like, I would love to see, if you showed people the mustache on its own, how many people would go straight to King of the Castle, and how many people would think, Scaramouche Fandango. Anyway, it's tangential. Main problem is, the film is odd, because it won an Oscar in 2019. It won it for editing, and that is a driving Miss Daisy moment, and then some. I cannot understand why editing? Sound mixing, I slightly understand because it's a sort of theme of the film, but the editing of this film is completely rubbish. I'm sure John Ottman feels like a lucky man, because in my opinion, Yorgos Mavropsarides and Barry Alexander Brown have been robbed for The Favourite and Black Klansman, respectively. So I know that's two Yorgoses on the same film, and I can't work out what the collective noun for that is. Is it a plethora of Yorgai? A collection of Yorgs? Any help would be greatly appreciated. But yeah, the film, it's so choppy, it's lazy in places, it doesn't fit. There seems to be a lot of slow zooms fit into tiny spaces which mean nothing but take the whole of the scene and turn it into something which it feels like it's going to crescendo. And actually it ends up just being a fairly straightforward one-to-one shot, reverse shot kind of deal. Here is what I'm going to say about the editing of this film, and I think despite the amount of screaming and crying that I did about films like Morbius and Mr. Malcolm's List, this might be the single phrase that is the cruelest thing I have said about any film on this podcast so far. I mean this without any pleasantry. It is an absolute fucking TikTok of a film. This is a film made for people who have 20-second attention spans. It is so short and zippy, as if it's trying to catch on board, it's trying to take you with it, it's never trying to make you lose interest. But what that means is every element of character or emotion has no space to breathe, no space to be absorbed, no space for anything to have impact on other characters in the scene. It suffers from what I like to call the later Poldark conundrum. Short scene where everything has to be said and there is lots to say, but there's nothing to do, really. The script is relatively weak. There's some funny band interaction moments, but on the whole, it's dry, it's dusty, it's slightly unimaginative. I think people, and by people I mean the Oscars, were blinded by the banner of Queen and the majesty that they hold. It's overly colourful in the aim of glamorising things rather than telling the right story. That's another of the problems to me, when the only thing the film tries to do is tell the story of Queen and gets it wrong and makes things look weird. You leave me as an audience member with nowhere to go in an imaginative sense. All I can do is make of what you have given me, but what you've given me isn't the right story or the right way of presenting it, and so I'm stuck in a place that I don't really want to be. You can feel the disrupted production in the key elements of the film, and that is a big issue to me. It makes it a tough watch. I think the film would have been better placed from the start in the safer hands of someone like Damien Chazelle. In fact, I would have adored seeing the film remade with Chazelle's direction. Even Catherine Bigelow springs to mind in terms of the possible mood or scale of what ended up being on the screen. It could have been done brilliantly, but it kind of just felt wrong from the start. That's not to say that this film is just rubbish and you shouldn't watch it, because there are good bits in it, like the individual portrayals of the band members in the film and the characters in the film on the whole are largely really strong, and they deserve great credit. But the fact that this took home the editing Oscar is really weird and painful to me. It takes huge liberties with the Queen story, and I know I mentioned aficionados being, oh, they got that wrong in the intro, but they really got this wrong here. So there are just so many random elements that have been changed for seemingly no good reason. Like, the first Top of the Pops performance isn't Killer Queen, it's Seven Seeds of Rye, and most people know that. And, you know, the fact they played Fat Bottom Girls before they released Bohemian Rhapsody, which makes no logical sense whatsoever. And so they're, for no real reason other than possible narrative adjustment, they are playing with chronology here in a way which is just going to upset more people than it is going to make them happy. Because, as I said before, because there is no imaginative direction for me to go in terms of this film, all I'm seeing is what's played out in front of me as a chronological story. But if I can't get that, and you're taking the events out of order, it makes it even less of a good investment of my time. But it was all right. It was okay. I didn't despise it. I didn't hate it. I don't have loathing for it. I don't have contempt for it. But way too much of it bugged me and irked me a little bit for me to properly get along with it and dive into the world. It's like Darkest Hour. People keep saying, oh yeah, I've seen Bohemian Rhapsody. That's a good film. I've seen Darkest Hour. That's a good film. No. These are good performances. These are outstanding performances in exceptionally average films, and that is exactly what happened here. So comfortably in third place is Bohemian Rhapsody. In second place then, remember that Dexter Fletcher bloke? Because he's back with Rocket Man at number 2, and this to me feels like a flip side, because this is an out and out Dexter Fletcher piece from the beginning, thank God. He's also directed Eddie the Eagle as well, hence Taron Egerton's presence. It was written by Lee Hall, who wrote things for Billy Elliot, Pride and Prejudice, War Horse. He's done the screenplays for all of those, but unfortunately he did co-write the script of Cats with Tom Hooper, so let's just ignore that bit, that IMDb credit. Let's just move away from that. This is an absolutely fabulous film. It's biographical through line, but it's essentially a movie musical. I mean, fundamentally, it is a movie musical. It doesn't do the Bohemian Rhapsody thing of everything being out of place. This has the benefit of just being a jukebox where they will play the hits. I think a large part of that was having David Furnish helping with the production in terms of keeping things in line, because he will have been very helpful in keeping it straight and not taking over impudent leaps in the hope that people sit tight and just absorb it. Its structure is one of the cleverest things I've seen in a modern movie musical, in that it is a confessional structure, the kind of dressed as the demon nature of the narrator. It's a sort of vaudevillian performance, like an unreliable narrator ringmaster giving us the piece, and I love the feeling and the mood that sets to the rest of the contrasting, bright and fanciful images that you see. It's a fantastically confident directing style. It's like Sunshine on Leith, which I think is just gorgeous. Dexter Fletcher's an actual genius. He stopped Bohemian Rhapsody from being a total car crash and actually essentially rescued it, because his work was really integral in sort of tying things together and making it seem like at least a coherent piece in terms of the actual structure of the film. In terms of this film, the set pieces and some of the sequences are extraordinary. The Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting, from childhood to adulthood, that little scene, that sequence, through the fairground dance, it's not just superbly choreographed, but we are guided beautifully through it by Fletcher by taking the camera with us. It's like it's perfectly done. It's bold, it's zippy without being choppy or short or messy like Bohemian Rhapsody, and that's the perfect style of creation for a film about a man this complex and with this incredible life, as we will soon find out. Again, the central performance is excellent, but it went slightly under the radar in terms of awards. Taron Egerton is brilliant. I think he deserved to be in the Oscar shortlist for the year, personally. I mean, it was quite a strong list. The only questionable inclusion would probably be Antonio Banderas in Pain and Glory, but I do think that's a great performance anyway. I just would have liked to see his name be added to the list. It's not quite on the transformative level of Rami Malek, which is why it probably didn't quite receive as much attention, but it's still a magnificent capture of one of the nation's most beloved faces and figures. The benefit this has to me is that Elton John, particularly in these early years that are being shown here, was not just an icon, but he was a vulnerable icon. You know, this idea of the boy hiding behind the glasses, the whole thing in the film of him having to play act being confident, you know, this whole idea of when are you going to hug me? The whole theme is I want love, I need a hug. And there's a fantastically worried sense of bravado from Taron Egerton, which is played superbly. I mean, it's on the dot acting. It really is. The film acknowledged the nature of modern musicals, which was excellent. You know, it's the perfect marriage of visuals matching with music, and that is something that I think some movie musicals do have a tough time doing. I mean, it was demonstrated well in West Side Story, the recent one with Steven Spielberg. But I would argue that's easier in the sense that, you know, that is a classic, and there have been interpretations of West Side Story in theatre productions till the cows come home. And so actually, the idea of putting it to music is relatively straightforward, whereas with a new idea like La La Land, for example, or this, the notion that you are creating a new world and a new set of songs and a new environment for people to grasp with, and then choreographing the visuals to perfectly match up with the music it's a chef's kiss. It also is the perfect way to honour the idea of a movie musical, because there is a snobbery about musicals that happens in which people say, well, I think they're only really for the stage. And I think that is unfair, but I think it's because of musicals where perhaps the idea of the art form is not really respected. I mean, you can have people singing, but doesn't necessarily match up with what's happening on screen. Whereas this is like a theatre musical, but out and out on the screen. The idea of everything being choreographed, the idea of everything being seen, the idea of everything always being a front to an audience, and this is the perfect version of that. Also, I can't ever look at Stephen Graham again without going, I'm going to have a massage, because I love that line. The ambulance gurney to the stage is a brilliant shift. And it's the same with Taron's fake smile into the Dodger Stadium. You know, this is the actor reflecting exactly what the camera is doing, because it goes from this horrible ambulance gurney through this tunnel and then into the stage where there's a massive crowd waiting. And Taron's face has to do exactly the same thing in terms of going from horrendously ill to just whacking that great bravado smile back on. I love that the actions of the actors are mirrored by the brilliance of the thematic filmmaking. I think that's such a clever way to do things. The soundtrack of this film is also absolutely god tier. It's a fabulously fun, endlessly rewarding, brilliantly constructed piece by an absolute genius, and I'm glad that this did win an Oscar, even if it was just for Best Original Song. It's a great film. It's a fantastic encapsulation. It's a fantastic emotional experience, because yes, there are factual inaccuracies in this film, and that has to be noted because they were noted with Bohemian Rhapsody, but they aren't the kind of grand mistellings that occur in Bohemian Rhapsody. This has a fantastic emotional through line, and it's absolutely spot on in terms of what you want from a movie musical, which at its core, it very much is. The Cannes Film Festival did give it a standing ovation. I don't love the Cannes Film Festival, to be honest. I think it's a place where people who are film snobberies go and work out which film they're going to make the hipster's choice and thrust into the world. For example, I know that Cannes responded very well to film Socialisme, which is a very, very odd piece of filmmaking. Don't waste your time watching it. I sat through about 20 minutes before realising it was absolute garbage. Anyway, this does everything it needs to and ticks every single box, and this is how you do a biopic of a figure like Elton John. Which means we get to number one, and you've worked it out. It's Elvis. The King is Back on Top. So it's directed by Baz Luhrmann, and it's written by him as well, along with Sam Bromwell, Craig Pearce, and Jeremy Dono, all adding in their own help. The film, to me, is the cinematic incarnation of electricity, in a very different way to The Prestige, I might add. But I cannot think of a better topic for Baz Luhrmann to make a film about. I've never truly loved anything Baz Luhrmann has ever done, which I know is a bit of a hot take because I can appreciate the glory of Romeo and Juliet and even some of the great scenes in The Great Gatsby to some extent, though I think it obviously has problems. This, however, needed absolutely no permission at all to wash over me and go hell for leather. It is a no-holds-barred thrill ride which builds the carnival around you and straps you into the front seat. The seeming overarching consistency with these films is that they have a fantastic central performance, and this, for me, is the jewel in the crown. I think personally this is better than Rami Malek, and I think this is an astonishing piece of performance by Austin Butler. I think he's captured the spirit of Elvis and his character perfectly. I was completely and utterly transfixed by it, and I forgot that I was in fact watching Austin Butler. It felt like we had just been let into the most intimate view of Elvis's personal life ever. It's one of the most astonishing performances I've seen in a while. Not since Joaquin Phoenix and Joker have I been so certain of a performance taking home the accolades that year. If this man doesn't win the Oscars, it means two things. One, they've gone and shagged it again and got it wrong, and it's going to go to Colin Firth or Alexander Skarsgård or Jared Leto. Or two, someone has just produced the most mind-boggling, stomach-twisting, chair-flippingly good performance in the last 100 years. It is a divine achievement of performance, and I think he deserves such incredible credit, which is nice to see him actually getting, broadly widespread recognition for how extraordinary he is. The whole movie is made to look like a poster for an Elvis performance. Side note, I do think Alex Skarsgård will be on the shortlist for the Oscars. But anyway, the whole movie is made to look like a poster from an Elvis performance, as if hyping up his own show, and quite rightly may he do so. In terms of the anti-hero narration idea that we talked about in Rocketman, this does that very, very well as well, because the film is narrated in sections by an old Colonel Parker, who's played by Tom Hanks. I think the emphasis is on his role in the Elvis story and his negative wheelings and dealings which drove Elvis to collapse. I think this works to perfection, because it doesn't just go, this man bad, he rubbish, and he eats the drugs, and he throw the dicey dice, and he throw lots of money away, which it could easily have done, but instead it gives the film an actually exciting through line in terms of making us question how we're going to see the film. How are we going to perceive this film and the characters in it? And that gives us even more weight, because it's proposing us a setup which it may or may not live up to, that we are constantly then analysing alongside the incredible story of Elvis. This is why this is number one for me, because it does more than just tell the story. I mean, Rocketman did that as well, in terms that it had, the elements of romance which were fantastic in it, but this actually also gives you some sort of imaginative thing for you to ponder on yourself and consider as you're watching the film alongside these incredibly told events. This brings me on to, however, with the idea of the anti-narrator and Colonel Parker, my only possible gripe with the film. I mean, I kind of have two gripes, but they're one of them's meh. So I'll say that after. Look, okay, here it is. I cannot tell if Tom Hanks' Snotman is utterly camp, overplayed ridiculousness and could have been a parody character done by Michael Myers. Michael Myers? That's the dude from Halloween. Mike Myers. Or if Mike Myers would simply have done a really good job in terms of his mannerisms and his accent in playing the character in the film, and the whole thing would have worked together anyway. It's on the edge of silliness, his performance, and I think it does sometimes, tilt the seesaw a little bit, but it probably is just right, I would say. The other gripe is that it does feel slightly long, in that I did become aware that I was, sitting and shuffling in my chair a little bit towards the end, because it is a long film. It's nearly 3 hours long. However, on the whole, I didn't actually care. I was enjoying it too much. It's colourful in a way which perfectly sets out Elvis's world, and though this does have relatively short scenes and zippy cuts, it doesn't do what Rhapsody did, where each scene is telling you virtually nothing. This utilises every scene to show an integral snippet of Elvis's life, and I love the lack of wasted space, because everything is useful. The reason why I don't think I would be that mad if it was shorter is because the reason I think it's as long as it is because everything that's in there is well placed in there. It deserves to be in there, and it doesn't need to have much cut, I would say. There are so many scenes I want to pick out as spectacular, and I genuinely mean so many. It's a struggle to only talk about a few, but I'm aware that I don't want to start rambling on for the rest of time. So I'll mention a few. I'll mention the very, very key things which I think tell the general vibe and give you the idea of the style of the film as a whole. So, the standout. The scene with Elvis performing for the first time in his pink suit, as the ladies in the crowd start to go uncontrollably mad, is absolute cinema gold. It's a fantastic moment. It's a perfect encapsulation of the birth of a worldwide phenomenon which was previously relatively unseen in mainstream performance work. The camera is taken all over the concert hall and through virtually every row of seats just to give a sense of how universal these reactions were. It's a technique Lerman keeps going for the whole film, and I think it's perfect. He likes to take the audience in amongst the audience physically. There's a sort of metatextual thing that's happening here in that we're becoming a double audience member, because that is essentially what he's doing anyway in creating this film, in terms of putting us in an audience's seat to observe a thing, but then we're doing it again as if he's trying to replicate that we were there, and that is perfect in terms of capturing what everyone loved about Elvis. There's a kinetic blend of slow motion shots, then fast-paced sequences, quick cuts, light changes, lens flares, screaming, and lots of Austin Butler wiggling around, and as such, it feels like a fabulous, visceral experience, and that is a scene which I reckon will be used to teach students at film school in many years to come. I think it's so brilliant. And speaking of visceral experiences, the scene where young Elvis enters the church congregation, which is interlinked with Elvis in older stages feeling a similar way, is something quite joyous. You know, the euphoria that we are watching there is brilliant. It really feels like we are witnessing the birth of something incredible. You know, I could watch that for hours on end. Like, Lerman has perfectly captured ecstasy in what feels like its purest form. And given the extreme nature of that emotion, I'm so glad it was Lerman in charge of this film, because I think dealing with those kind of themes or feelings is where he operates best. Because he just goes, yeah, well, why just make it wild, mate? We'll go all here, we'll do all the lights, we'll do all the inflares. The others can go, like, flash the posters up. Yeah, let's make it like a comic book. Yeah, fantastic. I love all this. Yeah, give me more. Come on, hit more acid. He doesn't hit acid, but, you know, he probably does. One other thing I have to point out is just how well the film actually, and weirdly, subtly, portrays the downfall of the Elvis world. Because, of course, the events it shows are the downfall of the Elvis world, or rather, its entrapment of Elvis. But rather than have lots of shots of Parker yelling at a roulette wheel, which it does happen once, it has a lot of what are essentially drone shots into the International Hotel. And when I say a lot, I mean like 5 or 6. You start to notice it, and I don't think it's an error. I don't think it's a mistake. I don't think there's too many. I think it's a very clever choice by Lerman, as if to say, oh, maybe we're flying somewhere else. Oh, no, we're still here, for fuck's sake. And it also makes the whole thing look like a model, like a scaled-down model of a hotel with figurines in it, and Elvis is one of them, as if he's a plaything to the games that the snowman demands. I think that is absolutely genius. It's subtly reinforcing the monotonous, although exciting nature of his day-to-day life, but the fact that he is trapped and he is dreaming of a world tour which he will never get to go on. And I think that is brilliant filmmaking. It's got a brilliant supporting cast. Olivia de Jong is sublime as Priscilla. I think she captures her perfectly. Her emotions are really prominent in the performance, and I think that's perfect. His mum and dad are played weakly, but in a good way, in terms of their meek. They can't handle this new world. Dacre Montgomery, Cody Smith-McPhee give good, understated support. I think the whole thing, not just from a cinematic point, but also from a production design point, looks astonishing. It took me a while to get round to seeing it, and everyone said, oh, it's really good, oh, I loved it, it was so good, but I was hesitant because people said that Darkest Hour was really good, and people said that Bohemian Rhapsody was really good, and that was because they liked the performances. And so I was really scared that this was just going to be all right with a good central performance. I feared it would be the same, but I was really surprised by how much I loved it and was moved by it. I will also add, people have been sort of weirding out about the soundtrack. I think it's awesome. I think the blend of the shift up or the remixing of old Elvis tracks or ideas into a modern setting and then employing them into the film to give his actions the idea that they would be replicated in a similar way in a modern world is genius. I think it's a fantastic soundtrack, and I think it deserves to be listened to, and I think it works perfectly. I could talk for a long time about why this film is so good. Like I said, I slightly felt the time length of it being a little bit long, but, you know, it was a small price to pay for me because it was just flooding me with brilliant imagery. I could go on forever, and I already have, but I will say this. It is on a par with Top Gun Maverick and Nope for me so far this year, this film, and I adored the pair of them. That says quite a lot in terms of my taste and what I think of it. Also, Elvis messed around putting mics in his mouth a lot, and it's an extremely odd phenomenon to watch. There's a moment in the film, and it's completely factually accurate. I mean, it's recreated very well. I just wish they hadn't. Where Elvis goes, Lord of mercy, and then does something quite incredible with the microphone. Something that I would argue is just weird. But hey-oh, it captured it perfectly, and that is what the film is all about. I haven't said everything about all these films because I would like you to make your own mind up, and also I don't want to talk for 4 hours about them because I probably could. I love Queen, I love Elton John, I love Elvis, and that is why I sort of struggle a little bit with Bohemian Rhapsody, because it did feel a little bit like they weren't quite treating the individual subject matter with the reverence it deserved, and the other two did a far, far better job at that. So, those have been my thoughts on 3 recent musical biopics, or biopics about musical figures. They really need to establish a category name for these because it's doing my head in. I hope you've enjoyed that. It's nice to be back doing this again. I'm going to try, I promise, to try and sort of stay in the swing of this and find days to write notes and to come up with ideas and to record and to edit things. It does take time, but I do have various bits of assessment and examination coming up, so that may slow things down a tad, but maybe I'll celebrate by doing a lovely, massive podcast after it. How about that? Loads of people got the impression last week, to the point that I can't remember who was first. Lol, sorry. So, again, there was another impression at the start of this episode. Same setup. Message me or talk to me in person. I mean, if you can talk to me in person, then you've sort of got an advantage, but tell me who it is, tell me where it's from, and I'll shout you out in the next episode in front of a whole 10 people. God, can you imagine? If you do want to get in touch about anything, any feedback, any ideas, suggestions, queries, questions, or if you just want to have a natter, it's at BajoriaDom on Twitter or Dom Bajoria on Instagram, because I actually got my name right on that one. And I will hopefully see you very soon. Thank you for downloading my podcast. Bye!